Welcome, everybody. I'd like to make special note that the time is not 11, but 11:20. And this council meeting for August 23rd, 2019 will start here in a moment, as soon as we have the call to order.
Hicken,
Here,
Lee,
Here.
Walther.
Here.
rise for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, by design, we have a fairly short meeting today. If you remember the last utility committee meeting, we did kind of leave with some ideas about the Scenic View Estates sanitary system. One of those involved the health department, which has since, or some of our concerns or ideas about the health department. We did get some information back, and that might have kind of fallen through a little bit. So we decided to have this meeting today to move down the road and take the next steps for whatever it happens to be. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chris. I don't know if you've got something specific that you want to talk about in our packets, or?
So most of the packet that you got was included in the email. I did add a sheet that lays out the section of the Ohio Revised Code that basically states that a plumbing fixture inside of a house falls under local plumbing code jurisdiction. It is not required a PTI or approval from the EPA. So it would be the section of the code that John from the EPA quoted when he was telling us that if we put these grinder pumps in the house, the EPA will have no jurisdiction over them and therefore can't make us take over responsibility in the future. So that's the only addition to what you guys received in the email. The packet that I did email you, it's all stapled together. On top is the quote sheet for the entire system that would go into each house. This includes the tank, the electrical work, the alarm system, the control panel, and everything. The pump itself, which is the part that would most likely go out and need replaced, is not listed itemized here, but they're right around $2,200 to $2,500, just to give you some background information on that.
But it is included in the.
It is included in the 5,000, it's just not itemized in the top section. That
Okay.
3858 includes other stuff. After that are letters from Manning Smith Group, which is representing the property. Basically their proposal on what they would provide for the city to try and ease any concerns that the city may have. There are two stipulations that the utility department would like to add. They have a solar backup system, and I would want it to be gas or diesel generator. I don't want to trust the solar system. And the force main size in their original proposal was anywhere from 1.5 inches up to 2.5, and I talked to FECOR. They requested that we have a 3-inch pipe to make it easier if they have to jet. So I'm just going to ask them to upsize it to a 3-inch pipe for the force main, should we move forward with that.
That's the receiving.
The
Pipe.
receiving pipe, the part that would be public infrastructure throughout the development, that would dump into the gravity system in Hazelwood. Outside of that, there hasn't been a whole lot of changes. Like Mr. Hicken discussed, the health department said we cannot get prior approval for septic systems because once we put the sewer system in there, the EPA will say there is a sewer system within 300 feet of these properties. You can't do septic, you have to tie into that. So we coming back to this meeting, trying to get some direction on what to recommend to the developer, what steps we have to take next, just so we can try and move forward with this process, basically.
Okay, thank you very much. I think, first of all, I think I see a hand up. Andy, do you want?
I do have questions, but go ahead, Tim.
Well, I was gonna talk a little bit about a couple of things, and in the light conversation between committee members or council people that you've heard about this, I think we're still kind of back to a couple of things. Number one is, how comfortable, if any, are we with what's been proposed? How comfortable are we with what's been proposed plus a donation or deposit into a fund that safeguards the city in some ways? And what kind of safeguards could possibly be put in place with the verbiage or the letter craft of the legislation or the zoning? And so I'd kind of, maybe I'd bounce that to see if there has been any discussion or investigation by you, Scott, on how we may add or tighten down language within, and I can't remember, and this is especially why I'm glad you're here, thank you for coming.
Sure.
As to what piece of the legislation or where that language would sit, would reside.
So the thought would be, the utility committee, what are your major concerns? Let's craft language to address those concerns. And then my thought would be to place it in the development text. And the development text is a planned district, it's contingent. You have to build this plan, you have to build it per the text. So if we place it in the development text, they have to go back to planning commission, because once we get up to council, it's either yes or no. You can't deviate at that point. So they have to go back to planning commission. We add that language into the text. Planning commission makes a recommendation again, moves up to council. If council approves it, that's all part of the ordinance, that it's rezoned based upon all this information. So at that point, it's in stone that if they want to change any of that, they have to rezone the property again. So that would be my thought, for some level of comfort, all that language is in the development text when the property would be rezoned.
Okay, let's move to Andy's or I'm sorry, BJ.
Yeah, I was just gonna real quick while Scott was talking, and what Tim said made me think of it about the donation or a fee essentially that would be submitted. If you talk to the developer about that.
I did talk to the developer, I believe Wednesday, and we discussed, I think the number was about $300,000 was being tossed around. He said that's a deal breaker. If I have to do this fund for something that's never gonna happen, I'm not interested in proceeding with the project.
Well, I mean, if that's what he says, part of me says, okay.
Yeah, I
To be honest with you, I don't know if it's the dollar amount that makes him twitch there. And I don't know what the savings to the developer is by not, putting in, number one, the full gravity system the way we think it should exist, which I imagine is quite hefty for all 60 homes or 3 sections. Or at the very least, the one that's right adjacent to our existing system, which would certainly be less. You know, yeah, I don't know what the savings are there. I said this before, I'll say it again, it seems like the risk has been shuffled or placed on the homeowners themselves and then subsequently the city. And I don't know that I'm happy with the risk, you know, a developer shifting that risk in some way, shape, or form solely to those entities. So that's my feeling about it. Let's let everybody else weigh in though. Andy had some questions before.
Yeah, I've got probably 4 or 5 if I can start with the first one. I think that, you know, it's great that they've provided all these letters and telling us that they've done everything they can and they've done everything right and they've done so forth and so on. I think we have to at least respond to some of their allegations that, for instance, in the Manikin Smith one, they talk about how the district, you know, they just couldn't come to terms essentially. No, it was they wouldn't do what the district told them to do. That's pretty simple. It's really that clear. So that, I think we need to put them back on notice that, you know, this is great. This is a great paper trail for their story. But it isn't, they've definitely gleaned what they wanted to say rather than what is actual truth. They spun what they needed to. A couple other things, you know, in Manikin Smith's August 19th letter, you know, I found it interesting that they are talking about the HOA paying for electric and water hookup. Will be metered and paid for by the homeowners association. For how long? Is that in perpetuity? Is that forever? How long is the HOA gonna be there? You know, that kind of thing. So again, are they taking on this responsibility? No, they're shuffling it off to the homeowners association, which we all know can disappear, without us really knowing about it, quite frankly. Go ahead.
And sorry to interject, everything would be private. The streets are private, snow plowing is private, so arguably if the HOA ceases to exist, they don't have roads.
Well, that goes to my next question. You know, what are we agreeing to maintain? You know, we talked about the appliances in the house. Yeah, we don't have to maintain those, just like a refrigerator or a furnace. We don't have to maintain those. But when it comes out, I think of a water system, and once a water system gets past either a master meter in a private situation, it's not ours, or in a sewer situation, in a water situation on a public system, it's past the curb stop. You know, behind the curb stop's not ours. That's the individual. So how are we gonna deal with that? You know, I had a note in here that we're gonna maintain only what infrastructure, and we should define it. As we're gonna maintain the pump station, and that's it. Beyond that, the force mains are theirs, the appliances are theirs, what they call it, the 3-inch or the, essentially the curb box or their backflow preventer,
Right.
essentially in this situation. Is that theirs? So that's kind of a question, they don't really, and maybe you guys already know this, but they didn't say that in here.
Right, so what's been proposed would be the collective force main and the city pump station that they're speaking about would be the cities, and the laterals, the backflow prevention, all of that would be.
So I wonder how that works with private roads and so forth with public infrastructure. Are we getting an easement? You know, typically you work in right of way, right? In a platted
Right.
right of way. If this isn't platted, how are we getting this, are we getting easements to maintain those force mains? I would assume we would.
Yeah, we would have to have right of entry in there to maintain
Yeah.
them.
It would be platted, going through the process, and they would plat the easements. This is it would be similar to, Heritage Town Center, Carrington Ridge, that was a combination of public-private with the public infrastructure in easements.
Okay. If I can go on the 19th letter too, they talk about this, you know, this language that they're gonna propose. They need to propose that now. This isn't gonna go, in my opinion, my own opinion, is this isn't going through a preliminary plat approval, or development plan approval without that language already negotiated and understood, because we're just wasting time. So that's my opinion. They say they're gonna do it at the final approval of the development plan. They need, Scott, you need to be comfortable with that now, rather than taking it back to P&Z with something that isn't fully vetted.
Yeah, those are the two options that we could go through and pick it up at the final development plan to move it along. But the other thought would be it's part of the rezoning ordinance, part of the legislation. That language is in that portion. I think it gives it more teeth, for lack of a better word.
Well, and I'm thinking about more notice also, because the last part to my comments would be that every potential homeowner, I've gotten into situations where things are on final development plans that the homeowner doesn't see. They never get notice of that. And the last thing that comes out is, well, my realtor or the guy who sold me this house didn't mention anything about that. Now they're talking about training and this and that. That's great. That's fine, but that doesn't mean that the homeowner understands they're responsible for replacement. They understand that they're responsible for operation, but I don't see anything in here that says they're going to explicitly state and protect the city from the homeowner claiming that they weren't provided knowledge. And the only thing I can think of that would provide the homeowner knowledge is either a final development plan, a plat, it's in their deed restrictions, all those things, and threefold, belt suspenders and, a tie rope to make sure that the homeowner understands completely that this is all theirs, completely.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. And I'm not as worried about the first home owner as I am the subsequent buyer.
Exactly. When it turns into a private sale, between homeowners, they can tell anybody anything. Chris, you hit my other two comments. I was talking about a gas. There's no way you're going with a solar backup on this. It's a generator, and I was gonna ask what the force main size was. So if it's a 3 inches recommended, I'd say that'd be a minimum. The other thing I would ask is that they be required to put on their, this is private, are they gonna plat this? They're gonna plat this, correct?
Yes.
So on their plats, they should dedicate easements for future sanitary now. In case a gravity system has to be put in, and every homeowner is gonna be assessed for whatever that cost is, in my opinion, and they should know that up front. If these fail and and it's deemed to be a system that doesn't work, then the easements are already in place, and the sanitary system can be put in to service the homes, and it's at their and it's at the homeowner's costs, period. Last but not least, I think there was some misunderstanding with what I was talking about with the health department. I was talking about going in there to go in there now, raw land, and test the soil to see if it could sustain or could have established septic systems without a sewer. I understand once a sewer line's in place, they back off and say, per the Ohio regulations, you have to tie in. Well, if it's not there yet, so I think there was maybe some misunderstanding. I was talking about doing that now and having that pre-tested so that it could be a septic system as an alternative to a gravity line if a force main system were to fail. Because technically, if a force main system fails or is not being adequately kept up, then the only other answer they have is gravity or septic. That's what I was talking about. But you know what, we can go down the path of easements and understanding that the homeowners are gonna put it in. It's not gonna be the city, period.
I understood that to be the case as well. I think one of the things that I have an open question about is the health department saying, we can tell you whether it's an option that's available to you. The problem is that once the force main doesn't work, at that point, the option is gone because the sewer's already in. And my question would be, could essentially the city say, no, it's not in because it failed?
Right, if it's failed, then,
One
but I can
doesn't
understand
exist.
if it's one homeowner that has his inside pump not working, yeah, he's got it, that's a different story, but I'm saying if the whole system fails, what's the alternative? Gravity, correct? And that's the only other alternative.
Well, to that, when I contacted the health department, they said that the problem that he had with it was they won't do a certification until the EPA signs off saying there's nothing in the area. The EPA already knows that this is something we had talked about, and that's what his concern was.
Okay.
And I worry that if the force main system did fail and the collective force main is public infrastructure, that they would consider that a sewer system that is in the area, it just failed, and we would have to.
It'll be up to us to fix it.
Right, we would have to fix the failed system or put gravity in. But I think they would consider there being an existing system there, it's just something that failed, and maybe not
Fair
let
enough.
septic go in.
Fair enough. Then, I think we may not wanna be forced to fix a force main. We may wanna put gravity in and assess the homeowners, and they should know that up front.
Right.
I mean, that's, the other question is, can we say everything behind the lift station, essentially the force main, is private? Why can't that be private? Well, I know why, because then they're a producer,
Yes.
okay.
They're a contributor, yes.
Yeah,
And then they'd have to have an operator and permits and.
yeah,
and
they have to have
everything.
an operator producing it.
Let's let Tommy get in here. That's all. All right.
Yep, that was pretty much my whole,
Yeah, where do I go from here?
No, you're
How do I? I'm torn on this. I think we've had a lot of discussions on it. I really am torn. A lot of great points. I guess my first question, I'm gonna kind of put you on the spot here a little bit, Chris, is where are you at with this? Or what's your comfortability with where things are, all the letters that were sent, you know, all of the things, all of the information that we have? Where do you stand with this?
So operationally, I'm relatively comfortable with this system. Once they put the pumps inside the house and they fell out of the EPA's jurisdiction, that made me feel a lot more comfortable. Other communities that have this system that I've talked to, they say it works fine, that the only part they hate is the grinder pumps, that nobody wants to deal with grinder pumps. So by removing the grinder pumps, for me, it's basically just a pipe. It's a force main that is easier to maintain because it's only going to be 4 feet deep instead of 40 for some of these gravity sections. It's smaller, it's cheaper repair parts. As long as we can get the language settled on that covers the city and explains to everybody now and forever that these pumps are private and will not belong to the city, I'm relatively comfortable with accepting the pipe. Basically, just the force main is not a huge issue for me.
Okay, Scott, do you feel that we can 100% cover that liability in the language that you discussed? To take all liability off of us?
Then I'd probably have to touch base with Mr. Zetz, but I think we could spell it out very clearly. And, you know, we can put it very clearly in the, zoning text. We can put it on we could put it all over the place. We could put it on the plans when they put in the force main that we indicate on the plans that everything inside. We can put it in the deed restrictions, HOA document, the zoning text. We can put it everywhere to say, this is your responsibility. 100%, I can't guarantee, but I will talk with Brian now that we have kind of an idea of what the concerns are and what we need to do. I can craft language and run it by Brian, and my thought is we put it everywhere we can to make sure this is very clear.
Is the developer aware of that option? I mean, have you talked to him about that potentially doing that, or were you waiting until after today?
With the language?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had talked to him, and I mentioned the two paths that we could put it, you know, we go back to planning commission, put it in the zoning text, then move it forward as part of the rezoning, or we pick it up with construction plans and then final plans as the two paths. So he's aware of the two paths and the different options, but I think we pick the path, if we move forward, pick the path with planning and zoning commission, get it as part of the rezoning ordinance. Next would be construction plans. All that information is included in the plan, signed off on. If it's not in the plans, no one's signing it. Then with the final plan, we put it all over on that. We can put it on the plat. I think we can put it everywhere that no one can say they didn't know, because we can pull out plan after plan and say it's all right here.
So with all that being said, I guess where I fall is I've been pretty vocal, you know, when we're talking about development, of being very picky and very choosy as to what development we're bringing in here right now. And when I say, I mean in the city. And this is one that I think we need these types of developments. I think it's gonna bring a lot to the community, and I hope it's the first of many. So, you know, if quite frankly, if this was another development of shoving 200 homes into 50 acres or whatever, I probably wouldn't even consider it. But I feel like we really need to, we have worked with them, and I think in all fairness, they've worked with us. I think they've been very good to work with. You know, the letters and the attorney stuff, and I, you know, hear that we got the past couple of days, I'm not a huge fan of, but that's how things work. But I feel like personally I'm willing to take a little bit of a risk to bring in a development like this, because it's the first of, again, hopefully many. If you're comfortable with it, and you're comfortable with it, assuming we get the language in, I'm comfortable with it. I realize there are a lot of concerns, but I realize there's some risk, but I'm good with that. But the language has to be loud and clear, and I don't want to burden the city. I don't want to bite off more than we can chew just to get them here. But I also think we need them. We need this, and that's where I'm at. I'm not 100% against it, but I really lean strongly against the fund. I probably wouldn't do that either, but I also get that they're saving a lot. I think Tim makes a good point by not having to go the other route. I'd be more inclined to make them hit the
I would assume the city system where it's easy for them, which I think is like 2/3 of the project,
1/3.
1/3, which helps ease the burden a little bit if everything failed. Because I don't think that fund at 300 or even 600, I mean, when you added all the man hours and everything, I don't think it even touches it. I'm not really for the fund, I could be convinced of it, but I don't know, I can see why they would not want to do it. So, with that all being said, wrapped into with a bow, is if we can get that language done and back through the planning commission, I think I'm supportive of it.
I would like to say, I would not be interested in making this be the new precedent. Obviously, anywhere gravity can
No.
work, that is ideal. If it wasn't for this giant ravine in the middle of the property, I think gravity would be a lot easier to accomplish. But this being a unique circumstance and moving the pump responsibility away from the department operationally, it makes me more comfortable.
Well, and with that being said, if I may follow up on that, I mean, I think that's why I'm more willing to work with them. I certainly wouldn't want it to become the standard.
Right.
But, I think what they're bringing us makes me wanna be a little bit flexible with them. And again, I will say, I wasn't a big fan of the letters we got yesterday, but up until that point, I think in my 4 years here, I have never seen a developer that's been as willing to work with us as they have been. From the meetings I attended at Etna with the community to all the meetings I've been to. So I think that I'm willing to take that risk a little bit to support them.
I would, I guess where I would jump in vis-a-vis that series of comments is, I do think they've been patient. I appreciate their patience and their willingness to work. However, I think we also are trying to find options that help, and that make this a possibility. And that, for me, is one of the places that I think we recognize the fact that they have been patient and okay to work with so far. But even going through options is how we recognize that. That's number one. Number two, I am worried about the precedent. I mean, without sugarcoating it too much, what has happened here is somebody, whether it's a corporation or an individual, has purchased a piece of land and not anticipated what was going to go into all the work that it would take to make the sewer happen, to develop it out. And at that point, as they began to look at different options, much of the risk and much of the financial burden was removed and placed someplace else. And where that was placed was on the citizens that purchased the home. And I think that we can put language in there that makes it absolutely true, or absolutely, it's gonna be darn near impossible to buy or sell a house or a piece of property without the people knowing that they are responsible for it. But that act has happened in shifting that to the citizens. And if something happens with the citizens, it's gonna fall back to the city. If the citizens, for some reason, cannot or will not address a failure in the future. That is why I am for a fund at this point that, I don't know if it has to be the dollar amount that was said. I think that, just it's slightly arbitrary, I admit, that to say, well, it costs $6,000 for a pump, and basically we would just ask to replace every pump. It doesn't anticipate problems in the laterals, which are gonna be on private property, which are not gonna be our responsibility. Doesn't anticipate problems in the wet wells. If all of a sudden the wet wells start, is that the right term?
Yeah, the pump sits in,
A
yes.
6 foot, I think it's 6 feet worth of.
I believe that's what it is, like,
It doesn't anticipate
yeah,
those kind of problems. So I think at some point, I don't think it's too much to ask when you look at, okay, as a developer, you had to put in zero amount of money to, well, I shouldn't say zero, but you did not have to go and put in the collection system to our gravity system, and asking for a little assurance on the backside to cover some of those costs. And it wouldn't even, if indeed we have the catastrophic failure, that's what we're asking to put in the fund won't even come close. I think, you know, if there's 300,000 or 30,000 or 600,000, it still won't come close. There's a reason that it's cost prohibitive to the developer, and that's because to do it the way most places have you do it would be very, very, very expensive and would kill the project. And I think that we don't want that. I don't want that, but at the same time, I'd like some security in place in some way, shape, or form for the city. So, Andy?
Okay, I agree with both you guys. Bottom line, I think there's a project that the Pataskala needs. It brings a different type of, so I'm gonna say it the other way. I'm gonna say, you know, we need these kind of subdivisions as much as we need other types of subdivisions. So I think this is a good balancing.
We already have a bunch of them, right?
Exactly. So, no, it's a balancing. So, you know, you've gotta keep a good diversity of housing stock. So I absolutely agree with you. You may not have included the part about needing the other side, but I wanted to make sure we mentioned that. Anyhow,
Fair enough.
I cannot believe that $300,000 bust this project. That's a bunch of crap, in my opinion. But we'll go on from there. So, as I said, or as I explained before, you know, and Chris, you said, look, we want to clarify that this is a very unique situation. It is a one-time deal. This is not going to become a specification in Pataskala's repertoire of development. This is because of certain things. We've got grading issues. We've got the desire to keep treed lots. So to that end, I think that there should be additional language, and Scott, you know where I'm going with this, regarding clearing. You know, they stated in a public hearing that they are considering these no-touch zones, that they aren't going to clear in these areas. Well, that should be made almost to the point where it's penalized if they do go into those areas. We need to clearly note what is an area that they're not clearing and what, I'm fine with what they want to do. But I've also seen things change. And, you know, people decide to clear because they want a backyard where they can throw a baseball or whatever. So we need to put in limitations, and that means signage. That means, hey, you're not allowed to clear this, period. And the city can put penalties in there or reforestation requirements if they do clear it. So that, and I'm going through it, you guys are gonna hate to hear all this, so. You know, I think that the next part of this is, as I said, respond to their letters and the innuendos that they put in here that were not accurate, or at least spun to their benefit. And the reason why I say to do that is we learned a very valuable lesson with Bullet Ranch. And this also goes to your idea of going back through planning and zoning. You know, the Bullet Ranch came in and said that, oh yeah, we've had multiple discussions. None of this is in writing, of course, but we've had multiple discussions that we don't have to do any of this. Well, I don't want them to be able to say, we sent letters that said these things, you know, so and so. We need to be in writing to them back, saying, no, that's not true, and this is the way it was, and this is our position on this. Bullet Ranch lesson also was, you know, P&Z, they gave a specific application. It was shooting inside, archery outside, and now we're arguing about shooting outside. So we need to make sure that their application is absolutely accurate of what they're planning on doing, in my opinion. I agree that, you know, having a minor fund might just be unnecessary, only because it won't clear up this problem. If there is a problem out there, and I look at it differently than the grinder pumps failing or the wet wells failing, I look at it as our friends over at the Ohio EPA changing their damn minds. Because we see that all the time.
All the time.
They change their minds, we'll leave it at that, a lot. And all they need to do is have one bad apple that has this system that they don't like, and every system will be told to convert. and just the way they operate. And Chris, I don't think you're disagreeing with me.
No, the EPA is difficult to get a hold of or understand what they're thinking.
Exactly. So I don't know that, I look at it, Tim, as if we have a $300,000 fund, then some way they could say, well, you have money set aside to take care of this. Where it's totally inadequate. I mean, this would be like a $3 million problem, where 300,000 isn't enough. But, so if we don't have a fund, then we don't have any monies to take care of any problems, regardless of what they might be, including the crazy EPA. I know we used to work for them, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, it was me that brought I think Chris will correctly say that it was me that brought up an example of something I actually experienced,
Right?
which is exactly what you're talking
I
about,
felt the pain myself.
so.
Um,
no offense.
You know, the 1/3, 2/3 service issue, you know, they come in with this new issue about, they've got a category 3 wetland now in the problem. Too bad. You know what, that's just too bad. You can figure out a way around it, you can figure out a way to deal with it. Tommy's point is, you know, we can agree to the places that you can't service with force, that you can't service gravity, but everything you can service with gravity, you should, in my opinion. I truly believe that. And they can price their houses differently, they can do a lot of different things, but, you know, I strongly believe that where you can get gravity service, you should. Again, I'm gonna put out there, you know, getting the easements, in place for gravity, if necessary. Get them ahead.
By the way,
Pardon?
I like that.
Yeah, get them ahead of time. We don't wanna go in and negotiate with a homeowner that isn't gonna cooperate. You know, we need to let them know that if gravity is forced upon them, not forced, but is required upon them because of the EPA or any other reason, that there's clearly going to be assessments. We aren't even gonna ask you. I think by law we have to, but we really don't wanna be in a position where we have to ask you. We're gonna assess you for putting in gravity. So I said notice, give them notice. Chris, your 3-inch force main and generator, absolutely, and then, you know, the language now, before we go any further. Those are my criteria, and then I would be in favor of it.
With that said, I think, as you move forward to talk with them, I can come off I can probably come off the fund if the gravity portion, the stuff that's easy for us to get to gravity wise, would be included, meaning a force main for 2/3, gravity feed for 1. And I think that there's a logic to that, in addition to what Andy has just said, and Tommy. And that logic goes to, telling future developers, look, we still required it to be done the way we require it to be done where it could be. And so somebody who is attempting to put it in development and say, well, we'd like all 300 homes to have this new force main thing because all the cost is gonna sit with the homeowners, and we go, no, that was something different. Every place they could gravity feed it, they did. And I think that there's a logic there, so I'd be willing to come off that, especially since they've made the statement that the fund's there, it's a done deal. So I can listen to them say that, although I'm with Andy, I don't think that's a deal breaker, but okay, I'll take them at their word. I'm willing to come off that. Tommy, we've both been talking, do you wanna add anything else?
I feel like, there's a lot of moving parts to this, but I also think that, and I agree with, let's just say I agree with pretty much everything. I really like the idea about the easements, that's a good point. I guess, as far as, you know, I ask this question a lot in committee meetings, as far as the next step, I know that it's sitting on council's desk, tabled. How do we get them, exactly what we want? Are we gonna, obviously, we're not ready to do anything at the council level, but it sounds like it has to go back through planning and zoning.
That's correct. If you remember what we did with Heron Manor,
Yes.
so you something similar, that it goes back, they amend it, and we bring it back up. And it would be tabled at the 3rd reading, so it would need a 4th reading, so it comes back down to go back up.
Yeah, so when we leave here today, what's for them to know, I feel like they should know these are the things that need to be done. When we leave here today. I,
Just qualify things that the utility committee, I mean, we're only three.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about voting it up or down.
No.
At council, that has to be done at council. What I'm saying is from us, utility committee, I feel like these are the things, like, it sounds like we're kind of all three on board with, and this is one of probably 15 things, but it sounds like we're all three on board with not going the fund route, but they need to hook up where they can. That would be one, like, to me. So I'm envisioning a list of recommendations from us to them. And I'm not just a committee, but all of us. Is that, I mean,
That was our hope coming out of this meeting, was to have a list to say, this is what we want.
As we have been here talking, are you guys making notes on all that? Do you-
Yes.
Mhm.
Can
Yes.
you all get together and come up with a list, and I assume then the administration would sit down with them and say, okay, here's the latest.
well, but I agree. But at the same time, and I know we all got stuff to do, but there's been so many things talked about. I wanna make sure that you guys know what that list is. So maybe we just run down through that as a committee so that we didn't miss anything. Because I feel like there's things there's a bunch of things we talked about, so like a raise.
I would suggest either that or have these two, Chris and Scott put their heads together, come up with that list, send it to the committee, let each of us in it, make any comments about it.
Or that, but I feel like before it goes, there's been so many things talked about, I feel like we need another just quick glance at it.
No, Mr. King?
No, I agree with, that's where I was at is, let us put the list together, get it out to the committee, see if there's anything that needs added, removed, whatever it may be. Because, when we go to these folks and say, these are the things you need to do, and if they say, okay, we're willing to do those, we need to make sure it's the entire list, cause they're gonna have to go back to planning and zoning, and I would want them to have that entire list when they go back to planning and zoning.
I would put it to the committee also, as I give the update at the next meeting, is it worthwhile to provide that list to council as information? Does that give anybody here heartburn? I realize there will be a long discussion about it, but it's so in-depth, I fear my update would be so long at council if I attempt to capture all that stuff. Andy?
Does that in any way give you a problem, does it give us a problem with planning and zoning? If we're talking about it at council and saying, well, this is what we will approve, essentially as a group, and we all say, yep, that's what we will approve, and planning and zoning doesn't agree with it, or it could possibly be, I think they have to act as a kind of an independent body, right? And the staff's gonna bring the utility committee's comments to them to act as an independent body to send it back up to council. I mean, I think I would suggest that the report is, we had a very in-depth conversation, we talked about all these letters they sent, we came up with suggestions to staff to talk to the developer agreed to do so, and take it back to planning and zoning. That would be, that's how I see it, Tim, at least.
Okay,
It's your report.
I appreciate that, but I asked for the input, and so I appreciate it. Tom, you down with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So list not to council?
Correct.
Gotcha.
Just to the utility committee, and I'll keep council apprised via the, committee update portion. And it won't, in the interest of an independent body and whatnot, if somebody has a specific question, they can corral one of us and ask. But I think they'll probably, I think if it's working the way a committee is supposed to work anyway, they're gonna kind of rely on this committee to say, okay, you gave them these comments. Planning and zoning had one little problem with it, but the developer agreed to address it, now it's back up here. Utility committee, has anything changed significantly? How do you guys, if I was not on this committee, that's what I would be doing. I'd be looking at the committee members and saying, is this pretty much, you guys spent some time hammering this out? Does it look like how you think it'll work? And then, of course, it'll be up to each individual council member to vote their conscience or vote how they think it should be.
I would add that I think this is as bulletproof, so Scott, you were asking, can you guarantee, I know you can't, nobody can, I mean, we have no idea, they may outlaw sewage in general, so, who knows? But, I mean, as far as we can go for the city, I feel pretty confident that this is pretty solid. And I think it's a great subdivision idea. I'm hopeful it's successful, and I think this is a very good way for them to be successful, because as Tim has said, it will save them a substantial amount of money. And that's good, there's nothing wrong with that. So,
I agree with that. I'm not here to be, an obstructionist about it. Just wanna make sure that we're protected, so I've always said that. I have other on, I think that's all for that. I think the marching orders are there. We'll look for the combined list to come to us quickly, and with the caveat of, if you don't hear back from us, move forward.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is too, is it's like, I mean, if this is something that we move on pretty quickly, we might have more answers by the time it comes back around to the next council meeting, you know,
It's possible.
which may change your report.
It may.
Appreciate the guidance, we'll definitely get on it.
So the other thing, the agenda now lists an other. I do not have any other. I would say, just a quick note to the committee, I did reach out to Mr. Fox and gave him an opportunity to come give an update. Unfortunately, he had already made plans. So I thanked him and said, maybe he'd come to the next council meeting or whatever. So I don't have anything other. Nobody else does. I would,
Do you want to talk about that?
Yes.
You know,
I'm
an
I'm
update on
anxious
the
about it
agreement,
because September 3rd is gonna be here.
we have something that's in pretty good shape that's been sent to council for comment, correct? I think that was sent out.
Yes.
I'm sure.
I actually have no clue what we're talking about.
Oh, the agreement, sewer and water district.
Oh,
agreement.
okay,
I'm sorry.
that's okay.
I'm anxious to hear any comments back from council.
Yeah, I think where that, and this isn't purely utility committee, but certainly Eddie and I and Chris have all been working on it. I think where we're at is council has been, not only received that document, but invited to ask specific questions. I think council's gonna just have to get comfortable with what's been developed and make their own determinations. And I anticipate that happening rather fairly quickly.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
And I don't know if anybody can maybe prod a little bit. To
Members
say,
of
hey,
council.
remember to make any comments.
We certainly will give a reminder.
And I'm happy
That's
to
a
do
good
that
word.
too, so.
I just wondered, is council looking for a recommendation from the utility committee?
I think we had talked about it. I don't think, I guess my 2 cents on it is, since it was not the utility committee that was tasked with it, I don't think they necessarily have to have the utility committee's blessing or whatever you wanna call it. I think it's gonna be up to Chris, Andy and I, Brian Zetz, whoever worked on it, more Chris than anybody else, because Brian wants to make sure that we don't violate open meeting laws, to explain exactly what's contained in the agreement and what, the path that was taken. But I don't think the utility committee needs to weigh in on it, and here's why, Tommy. I'm worried that, first of all, I don't know if we're all prepared to suddenly give it our blessing now, because it may change. And I don't want to wait for a committee recommendation, because it could end up being a time impediment. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, I see it both ways. I see your point. I also see, I know that there's been a lot of discussions about it. And sometimes council weighs pretty heavily on the committee. I would certainly be comfortable with doing that if you thought it would help moving forward.
Would it be something to give a recommendation for council to move it forward to the district, utility committees looked at this, I see your point, Tim. I think that it is a council item.
I think it could go either way.
I think it's a council item. And I think if Chris is able to, as we left it in the last discussion, you're gonna reach out to the individual and say, if you have any
Correct.
questions about this upon your review, please contact
I
you
did that, I
directly.
did that Tuesday to every member,
Yeah.
and I can do it again, when we leave here, I'll send the message
Yeah,
back.
time is
again.
of the essence, you
Yes,
know, if you
yes,
have any
because
questions.
to be resolution form at the council meeting on the third, it has to be in, next Wednesday, so I mean,
Yes.
we are definitely coming up close on a time limit. I also sent it out to the CJ and have heard no comment back from the district.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm not for or against, sorry, BJ.
No, go ahead.
I'm not for or against, you know, a recommendation, I'm just throwing it
No,
out there. I do know that sometimes when I've been torn on a decision at the council level, I weigh heavily on the committee that worked on it. So if that's something that we think that would be an issue, you know, if you as a chairman or anybody thought that it had value, then I'd be willing to do that. If not, then that's fine too.
Okay. I think we're good.
Okay.
With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Jess, can I have a vote, please?
Walther?
Yes?
Lee?
Yes.
Pickens?
Yes. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time.
Thank you guys, this was good,
Thank
to get this.
Apologize for